we have Doug Johnson with Water Security Agency, who will be presenting on the hybrid drainage and irrigation demonstration project. So we partnered with WSA on these projects and did some technical assistance with regards to soil and water compatibility. So very interested to hear more about these projects. So take it away, Doug.
Okay, thanks very much. I want to thank everybody for an opportunity to come and talk about this. I'm really going to focus on the demonstration projects with SIPA, but also I'll talk about the other demonstration projects to give you a sense of where we are and what we've been doing. My first slide up, two pictures of drainage. We introduced the agricultural water management strategy in 2015 when we rewrote the regulations, the Saskatchewan Water Security Agency regulations. And that date is important. It seems like it was yesterday, but now it's 5 years ago. We still are in some places where we need to figure out more things. So with the changes in the regulations, the regulations outline that all drainage works require an approval, regardless of when and where they were constructed and the size and class of wetlands that may be impacted. We found in a lot of our work that the existing drainage works, and there's lots of them out there, are really working on networks. It's not very often that we run into a drainage project somebody's wanting to get an approval for that goes directly into a large river system. It typically goes across from someone's land across other people's land to, you know, to a number of places downstream until it gets to a place that's got a large enough creek or river system to carry it. So this is what we call networks. When you look at it, it looks like branches of a tree coming down to the main trunk. We are looking to work with landowners to achieve approvals. Our idea is, and I can't emphasize this enough, not in the business to shut down drainage, but we're trying to find ways to approve it in ways that are not impactful on the environment, but provide the benefits and significant benefits that are out there for ag producers. We're developing and have developed a qualified persons program to assist landowners, and we're going to be announcing and hitting a inaugural qualified persons session. We've partnered with Southeast College in Weyburn to develop this qualified persons program. It's going to be exciting because it's going to be different than what we've done in the past. But part of what we're doing is developing a new mitigation policy associated with drainage, and that's been a number of years in the making. Just when I talk about impacts, in our regulations, we are asked to look at current and future impacts and cumulative impacts as well on the property of others, on water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, and other factors we consider may be relevant. I think the key part of this is that we are looking to impacts on the property of others and water quality, especially around the receiving water bodies. We have been working with irrigation producers in a number of different ways around drainage. We work closely with the Ministry of Agriculture to bring irrigation district drainage into compliance. I know our Swift Current office last year worked really closely with Irrigation Branch to issue permits on 4 irrigation districts' drainage works. And I believe the work is continuing this year with Ministry of Agriculture and bringing other irrigation districts' works into compliance. Largely that's around the land control to the point of adequate outlet, making sure that you've got the land control over private works and public lands, crown lands, to get the drainage works to the outlets. So where have we been at with our mitigation policy? Well, since September of about 2019, we talked with more than 45 groups on drainage and mitigation. What they told us is you have a number of things to figure out, and you have a number of things that you need to learn about as we move forward and build that into your mitigation policy. So again, we looked at this and we decided, well, what better way to learn about some of the things that it's believed we don't understand than to do it through demonstration projects with producers and with producer groups and others. We're looking at the proposed mitigation policy and other mitigation activities to find out how they'll work on the landscape. So starting in the spring of 2020, we started work with 10 different partner agencies, each receiving $95,000 in grant to help evaluate these demonstration projects. I'll talk about the partner agencies, and then I'll talk a little bit about the on-the-ground projects. So we're working with the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds to get qualified persons available to lead the demonstration projects. And that's been a little bit slow with COVID-19 this year. Aaron, you and I have talked about this a little bit. This is part of the issue, but they're moving on these demonstration projects now. We worked with the Irrigation Projects Association to try and get consultants in place for the ag producer-led irrigation demonstration projects, and I'll focus on this. We've been slow at this one, but we're working with Heavy Construction Association to investigate the impacts of drainage on RM infrastructure and develop some tools for RMs to better develop crossing infrastructure. We're working with PAMI, Prairie Agriculture and Machinery Institute, and we're investigating economics and agronomics into ag producer demonstration projects. So we're digging deep into things like the yield monitor data coming from combines and costing and GPS to really figure out kind of what the agronomics are from drainage, less passes, less path length in terms of seeding and harvesting, and what the actual economics are from the yield monitors. And so they're doing some really interesting work for us. Also working with Wildlife Federation, investigating the impacts of drainage on wildlife habitat and expected species responses. We're working with hydrology, with the Saskatchewan Research Council on hydrology and drainage impacts. It's a combination, it's kind of a looking at new methodologies and existing methodologies to figure out how the flows and water levels are changing as a result of drainage. Again, this one's a little bit behind in terms of the activities. We are working with the Saskatchewan Conservation Development Association to investigate the thresholds for draft mitigation policy. They're going to be doing work for us into next year on this draft threshold analysis for draft mitigation. We are working with 3 other agencies for in-demonstration site research. We're working with the Soil Conservation Association and looking at variable rate fertility management to reduce the impacts of drainage. We're working with Discovery Farms, looking at residue and nutrient management practices, reduce the impacts of runoff impacts of drainage. And we're working with Stock Growers Association in the investigation and use of cover crop mixes to reduce the impacts of drainage. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a future slide. So those are the agencies. Now we're working with on-the-ground demonstration projects. So you can see some people identified that you will recognize with Aaron and Jared Gust, Jason Fries, and Sheldon McLean. We're also working with a number of demonstration projects on the ground, and they're involving retention, flow controls, other things to find out the impacts of drainage on lands. So one of the things we're really looking at with the Arm River Farms, some with Bernard Bosch, his approval, and a couple other projects. Those are the projects that are going into the PAMI analysis. So we have field data from some of these projects. Sorry, this is a really ugly slide, but I threw it up there because it's a flashback to the 60s. Now, this is the Discovery Farm Research Basin, and this is the Ag in Motion site near Langham. We developed elevation data, and the bright pink areas are higher, the green areas are the lowest areas, and it's really an elevation model. We scoped out and created drainage out of each one of those basins. We are going to monitor at the outlet of each basin. I should rephrase this. Discovery Farm is going to monitor at the outlet of each basin flows and water quality information to determine the impacts of the different treatments of variable rate, fertility management, residue and nutrient management, and use of cover crops. Discovery Farm went to each of the other two agencies and said, why don't we do this together? And then why don't we put it in a place where people can come and see this at Ag in Motion? So when they have in-person Ag in Motion, again, next year, hopefully as early as this summer, we'll be able to see this in action. We'll see the research taking place. We'll be able to walk around it, and we'll actually be able to see what they're doing at each one of these sites. The basins are small, 1.7 to 9 acres, 9.3 acres. But we set this up so that there's unique basins, and the drainage is not going from one basin to another. It's going to unique locations. So this is why it's been set up this way. So what do we still need to do with our demonstration projects? Well, we have to complete the mitigation demonstrations, and we need to continue to consult with industry and stakeholders on mitigation development. We need to continue developing partnerships with a wide range of agronomists, industry, and other specialists. And it's important that we continue to do that as we go forward. So what are we doing around irrigation? Well, in our mitigation projects with SIPA, we want to answer a question. Could irrigation be part of a mitigation strategy for drainage? And so if wetlands are being drained and there's increased runoff downstream, could that volume be used in irrigation and not continue downstream? Depending on the drainage network, could the additional water make a difference? You know, is it going to be enough? Could we tie drainage mitigation and approvals to an irrigation project? And the producers draining might not actually be the producers that are irrigating. So we've got a network approach where people from upstream are sending it downstream, and then the people downstream could irrigate with it. And what do the economics and the agronomics look like? Now, we're not going to get to that answer this year, but we're going to have a look at this in future years. It's going to be part of some ongoing research. So we reached out to SIPA in March of 2020 and asked if they would participate in the demonstration projects. And then using WSA grant funding, SIPA hired 2 consulting firms to complete the 4 projects that we've got on the books. These 2 firms are Clifton Associates and Wood, and each of these firms was assigned 2 different projects. With SIPA's assistance, the consultants were hired to look at the 4 projects. 2 of the projects are considered conventional in that the proponents were looking at developing pivots with 12 inches of annual duty. And with really the support from the ministry, we completed soil compatibility testing on these projects. In some of the cases, the ministry went out and did the complete EM surveys and soil testings. In another site, there was EM data or Veris data available, and MOA went out and did some soil testing to confirm that the soil was compatible with the water quality. So between different groups within Water Security Agency and others, we looked at the water quality samples that were obtained and source water quality, and we found it all to be adequate for irrigation. In some of the cases, especially in the Quill Lakes case, we've been sampling water quality and the source water on Romance Creek for 4, 5, 6 years, multiple different times of the year, and that was available to be used in this irrigation project, demonstration project. So what are the consultants going to be doing? they're going to be looking at the water availability. And for the conventional projects, they're going to confirm the conceptual dam designs and determine infrastructure requirements and costs for the proponents. One of these projects is near Dodslin on the west side of the province, while the other project is in the Quill Lakes Basin. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and why it's attractive. So the Quill Lakes is a terminal watershed. And anytime we could reduce the inflow into the Quill Lakes by using the water somewhere else in the basin, there's a positive benefit on the Quill Lakes. It reduces the inflow and then reduces the annual rise in the Quill Lakes. Now, it rises every spring in the runoff, and then the evaporation takes care of things. And for the last 4 years, we've actually seen a year-over-year decline in the Quill Lakes Basin. So this is some good news out there, but it's not happening very quickly. So since we had a peak in 2017, and we've seen about a meter, a little over 3 feet drop from that 2017 peak to the fall of 2020. But anything we can do to speed that up, whether it be through potentially diversion of fresh water away from the Quill Lakes or use of that water in the Quill Lakes, will help the ag producers in the area who are farming adjacent to the Quill Lakes Basin and the Quill Lakes themselves. Okay, the other two projects we called opportunistic irrigation projects, and that's really for lack of a more appropriate term. The proponents will use as much water as they can to irrigate when it's available. So they may choose a smaller duty and irrigate as much land as possible, or they on a particular plot they might irrigate as much as they can the land can take. So the ministry completed the soil compatibility testing on these projects. Water quality samples were obtained and the source water quality found to be adequate for irrigation. So check, we've got those two projects that are away. One project already has a quarter section pivot and the proponent wants to put in a second pivot. He's less concerned about having 12 inches of duty, but more concerned about the benefits of having more irrigation on his land, and that's in the Davidson area. So he was more concerned with being able to reduce or to irrigate, potentially with a reduction in his duty, but irrigate more land and use the benefits from timely irrigation. The other proponent in the Langenberg area is looking to install a small wiper pivot and then traveling irrigation guns for use from both the main slough and other sloughs on his land. And his aim is to produce feed for his cattle operation and improve pasture or forage fields. Both of these projects are really attractive because the proponents have experience in irrigation. They're not being introduced to the irrigation production. And the other thing that's important is there's no downstream water supply requirements. So what does that mean? That there's nobody downstream that says I need this much supply for my cattle or for my on-farm kind of water supply requirements. Yeah, I'm gonna focus on this particular project. It's Jared Gus because it's probably the furthest along, and there's a couple reasons for that. You can see on the left-hand side is the town of Davidson and Highway 11 going up, where people stop off at the Tim Hortons or the A&W there. You can look back and see a reservoir. That's the water source for this particular project, and there's already an irrigation pivot in behind. You have to look for it, but it's there. In the SIPA demonstration project, it's furthest along for a couple of reasons. It's furthest along because before we got involved, there was already a qualified person trying to bring the upstream drainage into compliance. Okay, there's roughly 40 quarters in the drainage network and about 55 quarters in the drainage area for the reservoir. The QP has identified the wetlands that are going to be drained or partially drained or left intact, and has identified the flow controls and the culverts in the drainage area. And now she's working on a joint application for all of the upstream drainage works. This is also attractive because the infrastructure is in place. Davidson Reservoir is not used for a municipal water supply at this point in time. The only part of the reservoir that the town uses is the area just around their water treatment plant, and they dispose reject water from the reverse osmosis plant into that part of the reservoir. That's split away from the rest of the reservoir, so it's important that that water isn't being irrigated on the landscape. The water quality might be a little bit different in that part of the reservoir. And spring flow that flows over top of the emergency spillway or the service spillway will allow that lower part of the reservoir to get diluted with good spring runoff. Okay, with the added wetland drainage in the area outside of the network brought into the contributing area, there'll be more runoff into the Davidson Reservoir, which can be used by the proponent for irrigation. So this is the entire drainage basin, and all of the yellow lines and arrows are artificial drainage or drainage projects that are in place already. And if you look closely, you might be able to see things that are indicated 18 inches, 12 inches, 15 inches, those kinds of things. Those are culvert sizes in the pipes that are being used in the drainage project. The area kind of to the west of Highway 11, Highway 11 is that line that's going, upwards to the left in this drawing. That's an area that wasn't considered in the water supply project, but now is being considered in the water supply for Davidson Reservoir. So the consultant did a literature search and looked into the past water supply studies to determine the potential runoff now and the potential runoff at the time the studies were done. He identified new contributing drainage and also looked at the area from the town of Davidson and considered that in the inflow. So when you look at a town like Davidson, there'll be impervious areas that have complete runoff, whether it be from rooftops or from parking lots or streets. That water goes into a stormwater system and then comes into the reservoir. That wasn't accounted for in the water supply studies in the past. The consultants have used all of this information and determined there should be adequate water supply for the second pivot and plenty of that. And then they're going to be working on, after there's some review from their work, they're going to be providing some recommendations on infrastructure needs, estimating costs to complete the work. And Wood Engineering has been doing this work and it's done a really good job in terms of accounting for what's going on here. Wood also has the Dodsland project out on the west side of the province, and Clifton Engineering has the Quill Lakes project and the project around Langenburg. Okay, so what are we really trying to accomplish? We're trying to show that we can use irrigation to mitigate the impacts of the increased runoff from drainage. We're going to figure out if there's enough water for conventional or opportunistic irrigation projects. We want to know the costs, so when we talk to other producers about using irrigation as mitigation, they'll know what to expect. And we're going to figure out the benefits to the producer and the agronomics and economics, and using the information from PAMI to really help understand this and articulate it. And we want to know if this can be a part of the mitigation process built into the mitigation policy. We're going to want to tell these stories through testimonials from the producers. So we're hoping that people like Aaron and Jared Gust and some of the others will step forward and allow us to film their stories. We're going to be talking with SIPA on their view of things, and we'll look to the Ministry of Agriculture and Water Security Agency to add in stories. We think that these will become video clips, probably on a YouTube channel, for future and be part of a drainage website that we're developing. So what do we still need to do around agricultural water management? What else are we working on? So here's just some clips from some of the other demonstration projects. You may have seen the project in the Western Producer, turning 3 little puddles into 1 big pond. We've been getting agronomists involved, like Jeff Shano here. We've been having some positive reviews for demonstration projects in the Western Producer. We've been doing water quality monitoring, and we've been doing this at Lang C&D and also in the Wood Mountain area, where we're measuring runoff and we're looking at water quality. We're also doing some drainage studies in the Crono area in the Armel-Lachouard, looking at water quality. We're incorporating drainage into field days with ag producers and want to be actively involved with this. We're working with the ministry and getting them involved in our demonstration projects. More on that kind of into the future. And we've been working with SCDA and SARM at U of S, MOA, and SAW to develop a drainage education program, potentially at the University of Saskatchewan. I would also suggest with the money that we're going to outlay in irrigation, there might be some pressure and some need for the U of S to go back in and start working on irrigation as part of their engineering and College of Agriculture work, and really build that back into programming at and courses at the University of Saskatchewan. Just a thought here. So some of the other activities of interest. We're working with the Ministry of Environment on prairie resilience, and this is something I'm working closely with. But we've been also working with the University of Regina on the impacts of climate change on water supply and water management. It's a little early in our work to talk about it, but it's something that maybe we should bring back to SIPA for next year. And there is some good news for producers, but there's also some challenges ahead. Just a bit, I mean, we're going to be looking at some longer growing seasons and some more heat units for different crops. So that's a good thing. But we're also going to be looking at continued variability, wet years and dry years, and maybe amplified. So that's something that I think that we can talk about in future years with or in a future SIPA presentation. So I'll leave it there. This is my contact information. People can get a hold of me either by email or can contact me directly. But are there any questions here?
Thanks, Doug. I'm not seeing any questions that are probably geared towards your presentation on the chat. Well, no, with the current expansion rehab of the Seuss. Well, I don't know if that's pertinent to this your presentation either, but I'll read it. There is one question here. With the current expansion rehab of the Seuss, for those not familiar with the Seuss, that's the Saskatoon Southeast water supply. When will there be more water allocation? So I don't know if that's one you can answer, Doug, or not, but that.
I'm going to write that down, and I'll get Clint to talk about that tomorrow.
Okay, and then there is another question from Murray Casper. It's kind of a longer question, and it's probably geared more towards the ministry, so maybe not the right time or forum to try to answer that, but we will forward that on to others within the ministry, and maybe that will be Mary's question will be addressed in some of the presentations tomorrow as well. So Doug, I do have a question for you with regards to these projects, and thanks for the presentation, really interesting stuff. For For the Jason Friesen project, how are you going to address, or what's the plans for addressing water storage? Are they going to be building a dam or reservoir, or using existing wetlands to try to store some of that water and prevent it from going downstream into the Quill Lakes?
Yeah, so I've seen the design. The creek section from Highway 6 over to the Quill Lakes has been surveyed with cross sections in it. So there was a look at how much water could be stored in that creek area between the highway and Quill Lake, and to determine if that's going to be adequate storage for his project. And that's something the consultants will be working on right now. But they did this survey cross-section information, the survey cross-section work, and should be able to determine what capacity is available there. So hopefully it can be done in one small dam, and that, but if not, then there might be a second small dam that have to be put in there. Again, the idea is to keep it within the creek channel itself, as opposed to allowing it to using wetlands and other things. Probably not as easy to do.
And what about timelines for these projects? Are you guys like planning to stick with them for a few years yet, or is the intention to pass it over to the proponent to handle the development, or how it's going to be approached?
I think that the idea is to get the information to the proponents to decide whether they want to proceed or not. Because again, knowing what it's going to cost, especially for the two that the Jason Friesen and Sheldon McLean project, what it's going to cost and what they're going to need to have outlay, and also what the operating costs are going to be. I mean, it's one thing to have the idea that you'd like to do it, but the other thing to actually have the figures in front of you to do that. So we'll turn that over to them, and then we'll watch the development go forward. And probably as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year here, we'll talk with them about where that is and what's going to happen there. With the other two, with Jared Gustin and with Aaron Gray, we're going to be interested to see where this goes, because it probably has a bigger impact in terms of the actual drainage and learning for mitigation purposes what the drainage projects will look like. So I think that's really important, and I suspect that there'll be an ongoing dialogue for a number of years after, and I'm sure that both of them are going to be putting the infrastructure in and starting the irrigation. So again, some more ongoing dialogue with them into the future.
Okay, we do have a question from one of the participants, Arlen Simonson. Go ahead.
Yeah, I listened to this last presentation with some interest. Working in both the drainage and the irrigation realm here in Outlook, we've encountered a few projects such as these. I'm just curious if there would be any sort of funding available through the CAP program for irrigators that are doing what's considered a non-sustainable project by the true definition, or if this is something that they're just completely on their own.
Yeah, really good question. Kelly, do you want to answer that a little bit with CAP funding?
Sure, yeah, I can take a stab at that. So we have dealt with some of these projects in the past, and what it really comes down to is water availability, Arlen. And so if it's deemed that there is a sustainable supply of water there, we will fund it for whatever volume of sustainable water there is. So if it's a situation where, you know, there is 30 acres of a sustainable 7 years and 10 water supply available for that project, we will provide funding for 30 acres and that 30-acre formula. So in the situation where, you know, they want to develop something bigger, well, you know, we still kind of prorate it to that 30-acre number.
So Arlen, I wasn't trying to dodge the question, but I leave it to the people that are really administering the program, and that would be the ministry, not us.
No, that's fair, Doug, and I took a screenshot of your contact information because without opening myself up to potential trouble, there are some pretty interesting projects that are already doing these very things that I think would be good ones to examine as well.
Well, I agree with you, and in some cases, we actually, I mean, when you go back to look at some of the other projects that were done in the 80s with backflood irrigation / drainage, I mean, there's something in there as well. No, I wouldn't look at that in terms of CAP funding, but there are a number of those projects that are being used on the landscape right now, more typically on the west side of the province, not the east side of the province, but that they are using some irrigation and some combining that with some drainage. So we could go back and look at some of this stuff as well.